All right, everybody, thank you for joining us today for our second installment of the Diverse Perspective panel here hosted by LawBank. And my name is Miranda Vieyra. I work with the great community of LawBank. LawBank is Colorado's oldest and largest community of solo and small practitioners. We recently expanded into Las Vegas. And so we are really pleased to have a number of perspectives from the Latin population of lawyers represented here, some of the leadership actually. So in turn, I would like to A, welcome everybody, and B, would you mind introducing yourselves before we start this moderated panel? Claudia, I'd like to start with you, please.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Claudia Aguayo for my Spanish speakers, or Claudia Aguayo. I am the president of the Nevada Latino Bar Association. We just changed our name. We were the Las Vegas Latino Bar Association. And I am also an attorney. I'm assistant city attorney, which is the #2 general counsel position at the city of North Las Vegas.
Awesome.
So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. John, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is John Voker. I am the director of our criminal defense practice group at Hernández and Associates in Denver, Colorado. I am also the president of the Colorado Hispanic Bar Association. We have not changed our name recently.
Arnulfo, your turn.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invite. My name is Arnulfo Hernandez. I am former CHBA, Colorado Hispanic Bar Association president, and current regional president of the National Hispanic Bar Association. I am a criminal defense practitioner at Hernández and Associates with Jonathan Voker. And thank you very much for the invite and for hearing my perspective.
This is so great to have the Latin leadership, in some of the biggest names in the mountain region here. So I do appreciate all of you being here. Let's get started. So just kind of going off from the top, the biggest topic here is really Latinos in the law. And in 2017, there were about 60 million Latinos in the United States, and that accounts for about 18% of the US population. Even though this population of people continues to grow, we remain disproportionately unrepresented in the legal community. And so I would like to kind of pick all of your brains. So how do you think, or how in your work or in what you've seen in the legal industry, how does this underrepresentation of Latinos in the law impact our overall community, even our image? And I will leave it to any of you to just kind of speak up if you have something to share.
Okay. I guess I could take a stab at it. I mean, obviously, I think the Latin presence in all aspects of law is important. So from nurturing individuals in grade school and their desire to proceed to college, from there, encouraging them to apply to law school. And then once they get into the practice of law, cultivating and nurturing that career and supporting them to the position of when it comes time to apply for a judgeship. I think you have to take a long-term view of an individual's career and make sure that you are assisting and nurturing it every step of the way. With the Colorado Hispanic Bar Association, we have liaisons to the law schools. We try to do outreach to grade schools, high schoolers, so that they see individuals that look like them, have last names that are similar to them, so that they know that this is an option for them. I think it's easy for someone who grows up and potentially a first-generation individual to go to college. They're not likely to have the same support and network that perhaps someone that comes from lawyers as parents. So being able to take that position and offer your assistance, offer your mentorship, I think it's extremely important to kind of cultivating that pipeline.
I agree that the representation issue starts way before law school. So I agree. Claudia, Arnulfo, anything to add?
Yes, I think I take more of a big picture view of it. I don't think it only affects minority populations or underrepresented groups. It affects everyone in society. When you do not have images of Latinos or persons from other marginalized or underrepresented groups in positions of authority, that becomes embedded in our hardwiring as society as a whole. And so when people do apply for jobs where you don't customarily see a person of color, there's a part of everyone that's going to reject that if it's very unusual, if they're not used to it. And you know, I do a lot of unconscious bias training, and that's something that we talk about a lot, is just being aware of that type of representation and the unintentional effects that it has on our behavior when we do see something that's a little bit different or a little bit out of the ordinary. So so that's one issue. Another issue is, you know, attorneys, we are especially, and I think I have a very clear view of this, but we are in the room when and where important decisions are made. I am a general counsel. That means I am advisory to electeds and advisory to leaders, local leaders. And so I'm in the room when those decisions are made. I can influence those decisions. I can give an additional point of view when these decisions are made, because we all have blind spots. So it's really important that we surround ourselves in the decision-making process with people with diverse points of view, and that will actually help build better solutions for society overall. And you know, it's just interesting. I could tell you stories. You know, I was raised, my mom was a waitress in the service industry in Las Vegas, and so I can tell you, you know, that point of view. You know, our schedules were not the normal schedule. It's this 8 to 5. That is not an existence that I grew up in. So we were cash only. We were daily tips. And so even just having those kinds of experiences, that will shape the rooms that I'm in forever, right? So, so that's really important. Also, attorneys become leaders. We become politicians. We become, not all of us, but legislators. We become, you know, people in positions of authority. People, you know, people hold attorneys in high esteem. So it's really important, I think, to have that representation, because it will translate over to multiple areas and have a big impact overall on society. I could go another layer, but I don't want to take up the whole time. But also, in terms of providing representation to people who are in difficult or challenging situations, it really helps from a customer service standpoint to receive services and receive support like an attorney does, you know, in all different kinds of situations. To clients, you hear your clients better, you understand your clients better, you make them feel respected, you make them feel heard and seen when they can relate to you. And even if it's your name, you know, the way you look, it doesn't have to be that simple, but I think just having that shared experience and having some you know, you're not so outside their reach that you're not going to understand them, and they're going to hopefully, it's just going to provide better services, I think, for clients overall.
I absolutely agree. Arnulfo, so you're a courtroom attorney. From that perspective, can you share anything how the underrepresentation of Latinos in the law kind of affects our image in courtrooms? You know, when the judges are potentially different or come from different kind of communities, the juries, that type of thing. Is there anything you can share on that kind of aspect of this issue?
Well, one, and I agree with both of my colleagues. I'm just going to take a broader view of this than Claudia did, because I think that we kind of lose the issue that one of the still present American judicial ideals, which we all know and love, is written on our US Supreme Court building, is equal justice under the law. And just by the notion of equality, I'll give you an example. In Colorado, 20+% of our population is of Hispanic descent. We have approximately 5.8 million people here in the state, a cluster of which is in the metro area, what we call the metro area, which are the 5 counties that encompass Denver. And if you look at Denver and Denver's judiciary, we have, on the district court, we have 2 Latino judges, and that is it. Now, how many attorneys are Latinos? According to the ABA, we're looking at 5% of the total number of attorneys, which is approximately 1.3 million, are Latinos. It is a gross underrepresentation, and you do see it. You know, I could say that anecdotally, I have been confused as the defendant more times than I would like to admit, by the judge, by law enforcement. I know most of the prosecutors, so that doesn't happen much. But you know, even colleagues that are criminal defense attorneys will ask if I'm the interpreter. And that's just part of the profession. I think that those are the underlying items that Claudia was speaking about when you're in this profession. Now, I will note an interesting point that goes to your question, Miranda, more directly. Recently, our elected DA asked for a study to be performed, and that was just published about a week ago. It is racial disparities in prosecutorial outcomes by the University of Denver. And they studied between July 1st, 2017 and June 30th, 2018, all felony prosecutions. And the interesting part about it was that what they came out with through their interviews with prosecutors and through the study of the defendants themselves, that items like this bias or unconscious bias, or maybe it's conscious, I don't know, that white defendants were more frequently given global dispositions or deferrals, which is really amazing to me. And that approximately 79% of the prosecutors were white, 8% Hispanic. That's also pretty amazing to me. And that, you know, one of the quotes from the prosecutor's office, at least one of the prosecutors, indicated that, quote, the law enforcement system as a whole that is racist, and it's obviously clearly apparent in the terms of the neighborhoods that are policed, the contacts with defendants for, quote, less than ideal reasons that the officers can write off as legitimate. I mean, so you're looking at a lot of prongs here, but essentially you're seeing an over-policed individuals that are being prosecuted in harsher terms than their white counterparts. And you're seeing that if only 5% of our attorneys are Hispanic origin, and out of those 5%, they are so infrequent in the courtroom that they're often confused as the defendants themselves, we have really a long way to go before this equality under the law principle even begins to apply.
So I want to make sure that everybody, I know we have kind of a really wide representation of people, just kind of looking at the names that are on the participants. I want to make sure that everybody understands, if you have something to ask, if you have something to share, put it in the chat, raise your hand, do whatever, because we have some really neat perspectives, some really strong perspectives here. So that was great, you all. I'd like to just move on a little bit to see, you know, as a legal community, from your perspective as leaders in the bar associations, the specialty bar associations, you know, what steps can we do right now to recruit and retain people like you, people that might not have had that pipeline of, you know, generations in my family were attorneys, I'm just going to be kind of brought into the family business type of thing. How do we crack that code on bringing more diverse people and keeping them, you know, in the legal community? Any of you that has anything to share can speak up first.
And I think Jonathan had a very good point to this, because according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I was appalled, or well, not appalled, but very surprised by these figures. In 2019, 23% of Hispanics nationwide had less than a high school diploma. 31% had a high school diploma but no college. And 15% had college but no degree. 22% of all Hispanics, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, got a college degree. Now, unfortunately, there are no statistics about how many of those went on to a graduate degree or a law degree. But it starts there. Like Claudia mentioned as well, for folks that are, one, and I practice quite a bit of immigration, culturally foreign, or come from non-traditional law families, I believe that the parents have to buy in to the proposition that this is a good, stable, noteworthy future, and that their kids are going to be future leaders of this country, like Claudia mentioned. But it has to start there. It has to start with a strong foundation of yes, you can, of si se puede. And it has to start at the home, because we're not going to see it in elementary school, middle school, or high school when, unfortunately, racially minority students are going to be clustered in schools and geographic areas that maybe are not the best and maybe don't have the right amount of counselors and or people that they can be mentees to.
So I'm going to go a little bit broader. So at the Nevada Latino Bar Association, we do everything that my colleagues just discussed. We do the K through 12 programs. We do the, we push education hard. We get ourselves into the schools so that young people, as early as possible, can see themselves or see people with names like theirs doing this type of work, just so that they don't have the kind of experience I had going into law school where they've never even met an attorney. So it's important to do that type of outreach, the K through 12, the high school. We have an LSAT scholarship program at the Nevada Latino Bar Association where it's a program that's 2 years old, and we've given out 57 LSAT scholarships, LSAT fees and prep course scholarships to help equalize that admissions process. So we are taking active active steps and have programs to create that pipeline. And then the hope is that that pipeline will become sustaining long-term, and that those individuals will then help pull other people up. That's not enough. It needs to be a broader approach from everyone in society, not just the Latino community. It needs to be, one thing that we're pushing here locally is asking everyone in our state bar to join all of the affinity bars, because that way they can have a stake, they can see what we do, and they can do it. In order to dismantle this type of systematic inequality, you have to dismantle it system by system. That means you go into organizations, corporate organizations, and you have them look at what they do and the disparate effects of what they do, and have them take ownership of those disparities, devote money to correct those disparities, and ultimately create a plan, a long-term plan to build solutions. This is not something, if it was something that people from underrepresented groups and minority groups could do ourselves, it would have been done by now. So it really requires everyone overall to commit to this, to identify, admit there are disparities, to identify the disparities, to then look into our structures, whether it be a state bar organization or a law enforcement agency or a law firm or a corporation. Wherever you are, it's important for everyone to commit to dismantling these systems that ultimately have disparate, harmful impacts overall. So what can be done? I would say, to put it more succinctly, devote money, devote resources to these important issues. If you cannot volunteer yourself, if you cannot join another affinity org to learn about the things that we do and why we do it and how we do it, then just give money to help fund these causes, because it is going to take a multidisciplinary approach across the law, across the culture, across society overall. It's going to be proactive education. It's going to be, like I said, legal changes. It's going to be policy changes within organizations. So it really, that's how big this needs to be. It doesn't all have to be at once, but people really need to commit and commit money and time and resources to this, to correct this.
That's great. John, anything from your perspective?
I think both of the other panelists, I think, covered it well. I do agree that everyone comes to the legal profession via a different route, and everyone has their own obstacles that they overcome. And I think the point that's trying to be made today is that people of color oftentimes have more hurdles to overcome, and what can we do to remove those? I mean, my mother immigrated to the United States when she was a child. Both my parents had a high school education only, but I benefited from the fact that there wasn't a language barrier growing up. They were able to advocate for me when I was in grade school. They pushed me to go to college, and that's probably more than I think many of the people we're talking about have. And so what can we do to remove some of these obstacles? And just as Claudia mentioned, it's at multiple phases. And for example, in Denver, we have an organization called the Center for Legal Inclusiveness that started back in 2007. And one of their primary focuses is making connections with some of the larger law firms in Colorado, and to provide that training regarding disparate impact, to provide inclusiveness in the workplace training to these partners and law firms that might otherwise not have thought about it, and to make it a more welcoming and inclusive environment. And then you have other organizations that's priority is on younger, moving on or getting into college, moving to law school. I think the point here is a call to action, and don't fix everything all at once, but pick something that is important to you and get involved, because there are a number of opportunities and a number of organizations that would love to have you.
I agree. Just to kind of button this one up. So you all have kind of touched on the pipeline starts way earlier. And I would suggest that if anybody on this call, you don't have to be Latin in order to help this community. And so, a thought would be, when I was growing up in a, pretty low income area of Colorado, we had a career day where it was the maid at the Brown Palace. If we could get a few lawyers from Colorado, even if they weren't, Latin American, Latino, anything like that, but just to show a different kind of level. You can think higher than I'm not saying all jobs don't have worth, but I do think when we're talking about career day, things like that, that's a fast hour for anybody on this call to go into a lower income neighborhood and kind of demystify what it means to be a lawyer. So just kind of moving on, in 2011, so we're taking it back about a decade or so, but my guess is that these still are very accurate numbers. About 46% of Latino lawyers said that their ethnicity had caused them difficulties in their profession. And, just kind of knowing my own experience with, people assuming I'm all kinds of things under the sun. Can any of you share any sort of experience you've had with marginalization or kind of stereotyping or microaggressions? The reason I bring this up is I think that just by talking it through sometimes allows us to see our blind spots of maybe where we are not being inclusive enough, or where we need to almost check our own kind of language. So anybody have anything to share in this regard?
I will say,
Okay.
Claudia, I will say it's a two-way street. I do agree with you that that in my experience, I have seen it, and I've seen it firsthand, and I don't think that it much bothers me. I don't think it was an obstacle, but the one thing that I will share with you that I think is more important to me is that I am a first language Spanish speaker, and I understand my clients square. I understand what they go through. I understand the difficulties it was to get a license, to communicate, to work, to understand the legal system, to understand it's different than their Latin American civil system, to be able to explain those differences so that they can have a fair understanding of what is going on and what the judicial process looks like. And I think that when I look at the good and I look at the bad, and I know that the question is, what were the bad? I strongly feel that the good well outweigh the bad. I strongly feel that, that's why we're here as lawyers, as counselors, as advocates. I know that it's, for some of us that have maybe a gentler disposition than mine, they would be appalled to be confused as the defendant as many times as I have. But, it really doesn't matter. It's not taking away from me as a person. What matters is that I am there for my client. And I know that's a very, it's a very unique approach, maybe. Maybe it's very short-sighted, but I do agree with John's statement that we do what we can and we tackle what we can. And us as lawyers, we need to be above that. But again, that is my narrow perspective.
I appreciate that. I think that's great. my experiences have been typically through microaggressions. They've been both, you know, passive and active, I think, from other people. The name thing is probably the most common, and I probably don't even know about the majority of how people hold that against me. But you know, they don't learn my name. They don't ask how to say my name. And I appreciate that you did at the beginning of the call. They will not address me by my name because it's just too difficult, I guess, for them to put effort into. And then another thing that I experienced that I think is unique from the female perspective is, so I belong to multiple minority groups, or not, I guess not minority groups, but protected classes. So I'm female and I am Latina. I'm also disabled. And so it's difficult to tell where the bias is coming in, but I have had situations where people, just like Arnulfo talked about, they say, "Where is the lawyer?" And they look right past me. And then what else do they do? Sometimes they don't shake your hand when you walk in a room. It's usually a lot of, sometimes men will come in and shake other men's hands and forget to shake the female's hand in the room, which I don't think they realize they're doing when they do it. Like I said, a lot of this stuff is unintentional, but it's very real. I mean, I see it, and the other women in the room with me, or the other minorities in the room with me, see it. I guess I'm like Arnulfo in that I don't let it bog me down. You know, it's somewhat annoying, but I kind of just tell myself it's those people's problem to. It's actually pretty embarrassing, right? Like if I know, hey, you forgot to shake my hand, that's something they should really be working on. So I try not to internalize it too much, because again, it's not my issue, it's their issue. But I will speak out and say when I see it, and I will, you know, like do what I do, which is provide educational programming for people so that they are mindful when they do things like that, so that they can hear a perspective that they didn't even realize that they were doing, that is their blind spot. So that's probably the most common thing I've experienced. I've also experienced very direct discrimination where I've had judges on the bench, and this was early in my career, but just go on rants, anti-immigrant rants, anti-Latino rants, and yeah, it's pretty alarming. It's shocking when you experience that, to see and know that happens from the bench.
John, anything from your perspective?
I don't have similar stories to my colleagues, and the fact that, you know, when I'm a man, my name is pronounceable, and I'm lighter complected. I don't probably experience what my colleagues do, but it doesn't mean that I don't notice it happening around me and to others. And I think it's important that, you know, just because it doesn't happen to you, you can still be an advocate in that position. You know, the Hispanic Bar in Colorado has an opportunity to speak with the county court and district court judges. They have an association that meets monthly, and a number of the diversity bars here in the state have been invited to present on implicit bias. And many of the things that my colleagues just mentioned are exactly what we are presenting to judges, specifically so that they are interjecting into situations when they are observing two individuals in the courtroom that are having conflict, and it is apparent that there is more to the issue than just a simple disagreement between the lawyers. It's important that they address that they become step into the role of an advocate in that position. And we as attorneys in that situation can do so as well. You know, if I have co-counsel that's female, for example, and I introducing them to opposing counsel, you know, making sure that handshakes are made, introductions are made, I think is important. You know, I'm not lead counsel, my colleague is. She is lead counsel in this situation. I think it's it doesn't have to happen to you to address it. We can all take a stand in that position.
Yeah, the allyship is super important here. It doesn't happen with just a few people caring about it. Everybody has to be aware. Just kind of bouncing over to really the criminal justice, really the issue of criminal justice kind of becoming a Latino issue. In prisons, about 20% of the people in prisons are Latino, according to the Department of Justice. And if this rate continues, 1 of every 6 Latino men can expect to spend some time in jail over their lifetime. And so, what I would really, the reason that I bring this up is, I wanted to find out from your perspectives, if there's anything that can really play a role in the key factors that maybe, is this issue just a Latino issue? Is it a categorization issue? Is it a lack of data issue? I mean, is there any sort of insight that you all can share into kind of A, this statistic, and B, why it's so general, if that makes sense, why it's just all Latinos, and when there are so many different types of Spanish speaking people, it's unbelievable. But we've lumped everybody in together for purposes of these incarceration statistics. Anything to share on what kind of can be done? Any of the key factors you all notice? Anything to share?
I could take a stab at answering that question, at least from my perspective and my practice, Miranda. And drawing again on the study that was recently performed here in Denver, one of the items that I think is really important is the item of economics. In that study, the disparity between white and people of color was principally noticed in the fact that they, in my opinion, were able to care for their cases in a level that you don't necessarily see every case being taken care of. In other words, they were able to perform mitigation prior to sentencing. They were able to get themselves in therapy in classes. They were able to demonstrate the lack of recidivism to the court or the trier. They were able to take these mitigating steps so that they could in turn potentially avoid a lengthier or jail altogether. So they were able to get a deferred sentence. So they were able to potentially even arrive at a dismissal. So I think economics is something that plays a huge role here. I touched on the item of policing and policing in neighborhoods. At some point, when a youngster gets contacted twice or 3 times in their lifetime, only jail is an option for a lot of these judges. And this is where it starts creeping in, the fact that there's only 2 Latino district court judges in Denver County. And they have been in that position for over a decade, meaning in the last decade, we haven't had any Latinos to the district court bench in Denver County, which is appalling to me. The last item that I will mention is immigration. When I started my career, many prosecutors, and I guess at that point, in the early 2000s, Colorado was more of a reddish state, kind of purplish, and now it's a blue state. But back then, I mean, prosecutors thought that the only way, and judges agreed, that the only way that an immigrant could get a jail sentence, well, would get a sentence, would be with a jail sentence. And that was because of an issue that we had locally where probation demanded that folks be employed, and judges took the approach that we would be complicit. In other words, the state would be complicit in illegal employment, and therefore they would not be probation eligible. So vast numbers of immigrants went straight to jail. And I think that when you look at immigration, when you look at economics, and when you look at neighborhoods, it starts making sense why that number is 20%. And a lot of it is educating the court. A lot of it is educating the prosecutor. But from my practice, that's what I have seen.
I think that one great push right now culturally is the move toward alternative sentencing programs in courts. They've been around a while, but I think that ultimately that is one place where resources can be expended. And just like Arnulfo said, where people can actually get they can actually get services to rectify whatever the underlying root cause of the situation was. So I think that's one thing that can be done is alternative sentencing type programs. And then even before the interaction with the criminal justice system happens, again, it has to be overall proactive societal push toward making sure that people feel, they become part of groups that are inclusive, that make them feel welcome, that give them identity, that give them purpose. It's what we all need, that human connection that gives us identity, that gives us purpose. And we all do this. And young people, a lot of times when they don't have a positive, proactive way to get those things, they will do things like join gangs or join groups where they're getting those things in negative ways. So I think it's just important overall for us to put resources toward programs that prevent that intervention from actually happening. And even once that intervention happens, to use that as an opportunity to, again, provide resources to people who are obviously not functioning ideally in society.
John, anything to add from the criminal defense perspective?
Yes, I mean, I think as leaders of bar associations and even leaders of law firms, we have a unique opportunity because we have a platform that others potentially don't have. And what are you doing with that platform? I think is important. So, for example, the Hispanic bar in Colorado is taking a position on a proposed rule change, several proposed rule changes. We have a equity, diversity, and inclusion CLE requirement, our continuing legal education requirements in Colorado, taking the lead on drafting requirements for statewide for attorneys to engage in that type of training on a 3-year basis, which is our compliance period. And making sure that we're advocating for that, we're taking that to the justices of our Supreme Court for adoption. I just received notice a couple of days ago that there's another proposed rule change. I don't know how many trial attorneys are in here, but Batson, a Batson challenge is when you challenge the preemptive dismissal of a potential juror, and it's alleged based on race. It's a rather significant hurdle to overcome to object to that presumptive challenge. And one of the proposed rule changes in Colorado is to make it more of an objective standard where an objective person believe that race played an inappropriate role in that preemptive challenge. So the CHBA has an opportunity to take a position and advocate for that change so that people of color, in our case, Hispanics and Latinos, aren't disproportionately excluded from the jury process. I mean, there are certain counties that, we have cases set for trial in, and I have to have a very frank conversation with my client who is going to need headphones in order to receive interpretation services, is dark complected, and is going to most likely be in front of a largely white jury. That is a difficult conversation to have. And if we can potentially do away with or limit the ability to dismiss jurors of color, I think that makes this process more inclusive. It makes our system of justice more transparent and trustworthy. And so that is my perspective of our role as bar leaders, as law firm leaders, is to take difficult positions and advocate for our community.
That's a great perspective, especially out here in Colorado, where the jury pools are going to look really different in the different counties. So now I know we only have 10 minutes left. I could talk to you all day, especially about this stuff. But just to kind of wrap up, the biggest kind of, I don't know, elephant in the room for the last year and 4 months has been COVID. And so I'm sure all of you know, I've been watching it too, how the Latino community has been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. In fact, about 1.7 times more likely to contract COVID-19 and about 4.1 times more likely to be hospitalized from it. And so, we do hear about mistrust in different communities when it comes to government and law and kind of things like that. And so, as leaders of the Hispanic bar associations in states and also nationally, is there any sort of kind of forward-thinking idea on how we can kind of bring everybody back together on this? Because 18% of Latinos in the US do not have health insurance. I think there's also some concern about how the information collected will be used. Will it be turned into ICE, kind of things like that. And so has there been any discussion from the leaderships of the bar on how to kind of bridge this gap between the community and getting them to kind of get on board with being vaccinated? Anything to share in this regard?
I'll add that I think it's a communication issue first and foremost. Even before you get to the issue of whether the community trusts receiving a vaccine, are we even communicating the message to them? I mean, you point out the percentage of Hispanics and Latinos that have contracted COVID is disproportional to the greater population. There are a lot of multi-generational households. It is very difficult to isolate yourself, to socially distance yourself in a multi-generational household where you are exposing elderly, more at-risk populations simply by living at home. There's a language barrier. There's, making sure you're reaching them, opening up vaccinations for, online portal only, for example, when the vaccine started to roll out. What percentage of our community doesn't have access to that type of registration, as opposed to we handle things in person via paper transactions over the phone, making sure that you're reaching the community in the means in which they communicate, I think is a first and foremost hurdle that seems to be starting to be addressed, but certainly not to the extent where you want, herd immunity, you want entire population as buy-in.
I think this is another place where representation matters. And I have directly seen the importance of that representation with regard to COVID. When your policymakers don't know things, they have these blind spots, like maybe these populations don't have connectivity, maybe you're not communicating to them in the right channels and the right methods, you're not going to the right places. You're gonna have bad customer service with your population. You're not going to be communicating well with them. You're not going to be, there's just going to be a disconnect. And so that's why representation is really important in these types of positions, because when you have a diverse perspective in the room, that person can say, wait a second, I grew up in this community. You know, my family would go to the SWAT meet every weekend. The SWAT meet's still operating. Can we set up a table at the SWAT meet and get people shots at the SWAT meet? And that's what my city has done, is we vaccinate people at the SWAT meet. You know, we're literally everywhere. We have, we've hired people to do, we've actually partnered with the county, which has an entire Spanish language campaign for getting vaccinations pushed out in the Spanish language community. And then the Nevada Latino Bar Association is a partner in community programs that ultimately we get together and we ultimately all figure out a way to push these vaccinations out into communities that we know. So again, this is why representation matters. It's these type of decisions and problems that have to be solved. And if you don't have a multitude of points of view in the room, you're going to have blind spots and you're not going to be able to deliver the services properly. But if people see themselves manning the table or see people like them manning the table in the places they go, you're going to have much better delivery of services such as vaccination. So, and that's a true story. I mean, I've raised my hand and said, hold on a second. Even when the lanes were opening for the vaccinations, my first question was, why aren't we doing essential workers first? The people who are actually, you know, getting sick, and why isn't that the first thing on everyone's mind? It was very strange. The first thing on everyone's mind was not that vulnerable population. So, and I just thought that was very strange because it was so obvious and apparent, but I guess it's not to everyone. So anyway.
Arnulfo, do you have anything in this regard, even from a national level, anything that the HMBA is doing with regard to kind of communication or involvement with COVID?
Well, I'll just mention something. I mean, I know we're short on time, and I don't know if we wanted to leave some time for questions, but you know, I do think that we have to take more of a global approach, and I think that the news outlets need to be able to assist in this situation, because I do think it's an issue of misinformation. It's an issue of misinformation. Our previous administration, yes, there were fears that any action would ultimately report to ICE any individuals in a household, and as Jonathan mentioned, multicultural household or multi-age households, right? I'm mentioning multicultural or what we have called mixed status households. That, you know, I don't want to draw attention to my house because one of my household members may be undocumented. But I'm reminded of when this crisis first began, the Mexican president indicated, oh, it's okay. I can't get COVID because I have a religious trinket in my right pocket and a $2 bill in my left pocket, so I'm immune. And, you know, I believe he was serious. And that's the scary part of it. It is the level of misinformation that we have in the Hispanic community is tremendous. And we do need news outlets to be able to say, no, you need to get vaccinated. Herd immunity is important. You need to trust in doctors or government figures. And I do think I've seen glimmers of hope with the change in administration. I have seen people be more mindful, respectful to the fact that, okay, this government maybe has my best interests in mind, not the previous government. And I think that that's really, and by government, I mean administration. And I think that that's really important, is that the public perception of our government officials, do they have our best interest in mind? And are they reaching out to us as Hispanics? Is it a two-way street? I do think we need to recruit community leaders. I do agree that there is a lot more to be done, but it is a question of trust and nothing else. And if we can't achieve trust with our community, well then, yes, we're gonna have these pockets of folks that are just not going to want to get vaccinated, feel the need to get vaccinated, or believe that their trinkets will save them from the pandemic.
I agree on so much of that, and if anybody is looking for kind of a call to action after this, that could be a really great article for any of you that do have access to Spanish-speaking publications or news outlets, to go on there and tell them, you know, this isn't going to flag ice, this isn't going to do anything like that, you know, because I think that is a real concern. All right, so we are at 1 o'clock. I'm happy to stay on here for a few more minutes. If anybody has any questions, I invite all of you to connect with all three of our speakers on LinkedIn. They are phenomenal lawyers and phenomenal leaders. So I am grateful to all of you for this hour. Thank you so much for sharing your thought leadership with LawBank. Thanks.
Thank you for having us. Take care.
Thank you, Miranda. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone.
Visit in Las Vegas, Claudia.
What's that? I didn't hear what you said.
I'll come and visit in Las Vegas.
Oh yeah, come on out. We've got the what are they called? The pool clubs, the outdoor pool clubs here. So.
Oh, is that a thing?
Yeah, they're the nightclubs are now going to pools. So that's what they do in the summertime or in Vegas.
I didn't know. Super fun. All right, guys, take really good care.